Good afternoon, everybody. I'm absolutely pleased to be here, and thanks, Guy, for the invitation. As been said, my name's Kris Smith, and I work at Suncor Energy, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Downstream. So what that means, just to put it in context, is I'm not an expert on renewable energy, and I want to declare that up front. I actually, I'm nervous when people actually say I'm an expert, because one of the things I was told early on in my career, I actually started my career as a lawyer. Now I'm in management. And when I made that change, I remember the fellow who said it to me, and Gord would know him, came into my office and said, "Kris, you're now in management. You're no longer an expert." And I've always remembered that. But the reason I'm here is that I manage the business that includes our renewable energy business, and I've seen firsthand actually some of these issues. And I've been in this particular role managing this business for about 3 years. I've been in the energy industry for about 20. And the business that I manage is refining and marketing and renewable energy. And so I've seen development in all sorts of sectors, and I've also worked in the oil sands. I spent 5 years of my career in Fort McMurray, Alberta. And it's interesting because when I read this, Building Local Community Confidence in Renewable Energy Development, you can just strike out renewable, and you're having a very similar conversation to the one we're having today, though there are some very specific things, and the mayor raised them around renewable energy development. And I can tell you, having come, I came to Ontario 3 years ago from Western Canada, and we were in the middle of developing 2 projects in Western Ontario at the time. And I was astounded by some of the issues that we were being confronted with. And so, you know, one of the things that I've come to learn, it's funny, NIMBYism, bananaism is actually a term I'm gonna start to use as well. And because I've spent a good part of my career in the hydrocarbon side of the energy industry. And I've worked at the oil sands. So you could imagine, you know, the issues that I've dealt with in terms of development and working with local communities and provinces and all levels of government and stakeholders and Aboriginal groups. And I can tell you that, but I didn't really, the penny dropped for me on how important energy is at the local level, actually, at a family wedding that I was at on my wife's side. And my wife has a big family, so that means I don't know everybody that's there. And I was at this wedding, and it was in Western Canada, and I met a young man there, and he was a power engineer, just got out of power engineering school from Ontario. And so I met him, and I thought, this is fantastic, because guess what we need in northern Alberta? We need power engineers, and there's not enough power engineers in this country, but that's a different topic. And so I started to have a conversation with him, and I told him what company I worked for. And this look came over his face, and he said, "Suncor." He said, "Don't tell my mom you work for Suncor." I thought, oh, I'm about to get into an engaged discussion about oil sands development or pipelines. And at that moment, his mom came up to me and introduced herself, and she asked me through the course of the conversation where I worked. And so I told her. I wasn't going to hide it. I'm very proud of the company I work for. And the look came over her face. And she said to me, "You are developing a wind farm in my community, and you don't understand the health impacts of wind farms on people." And I got to tell you, it stunned me. I wasn't prepared for that conversation. And I wasn't, this was before, by the way, I got into this role and have spent the last few years in the renewable energy space more directly. Though I have more stories about working with Gord 15 years ago when Suncor was developing renewable energy, and maybe I'll mention that in a moment. But I wasn't prepared for that conversation. But what it said to me is all forms of energy development come with issues that need to be addressed. And it isn't just about hydrocarbons. It's about all forms of energy. And I think His Worship made a really good point earlier about energy literacy amongst Canadians, and also the dialogue that needs to happen amongst all levels of government as well as industry and all stakeholders in between and around when it comes to energy choices and how we develop that energy and the trade-offs that have to be considered when you're embarking on those choices. Now, one of the reasons, I'll take a step back, by the way, I'm way off my prepared notes right now. So, but, why is Suncor in renewable energy? So we're an oil sands company. We're Canada's largest integrated energy company. And we've been in the oil sands business. We were the pioneer of oil sands. It's called the Great Canadian Oil Sands Company back then. It was invested by Sun Oil Company. It was actually Ontario at the time, Sun Oil out of Ontario that made the investment. And we had our first refinery actually in Sarnia, and people here will remember the Sunoco gas station brand, and that was Suncor. And but as the company grew, our CEO at the time saw that he saw this back in the 90s, that renewable energy was going to become a more and more important part of the energy conversation. And at that time also that the triple bottom line was going to become much more important, not just balancing economic, environment, and social considerations in development and energy choices. And so in about 2000, 2001, and that's when Gord was certainly working with Gord in the company, our CEO at that time, Rick George, made a declaration we were going to invest $100 million over 5 years in renewable energy. Little did he know when he said that at the time, and he didn't know at the time what the ARC was going to be or what the profitability of that business would be, but he thought it was important for our company to become engaged in that area of energy development. So that $100 million has since turned into $1 billion over the last 15 years, which still makes Suncor a relatively small player. We have 6 operating projects right now. We had 8, but we ended up selling a couple to another energy company. And in Ontario, I think we account for, I think, somewhere between 4 to 5% of wind energy capacity in the province. So we're not a large player. But we think it's important to be in the space because we see that this is going to become part of the energy landscape going forward. And we want to know, how do you participate in that? How do you participate profitably in that? Because I can tell, as a for-profit energy company, we are interested in developing forms of energy that are going to be profitable, but we also want to develop responsible energy that's going to meet that triple bottom line that I talked about earlier. And so when I think about development, and again, some of my comments are general and it would apply to any of them, but I will come back and talk a little bit specifically because I have some observations on the renewable energy development in the province of Ontario that I just share from a developer's point of view, is that it's become more and more important on how we engage communities in the development of energy. I can tell you I spend a lot of my time, because of the business that I'm responsible for, because I'm responsible actually for the sale of our crude production all the way through to the manufacture. I spend a lot of time in the pipeline space and in those debates, and a lot of time working with companies on the large market access issues, and I spend time in this space as well. And what's common between all these spaces is the need for engagement at the local level is absolutely critical to advancing energy development in this country. And it's become more important over the last 10 years than it's ever been. And the ground's been shifting. And Her Honor used the word sustainability earlier and said it's a tough word to define. And I agree with that. It is a tough word to define in a sound bite. But the other two words or phrase that has come into existence is social license. Social license. And as a developer, I'm actually not sure where I go to apply for that. I don't know what office I go to. I don't know who issues it. But I'll tell you, over the last 10 years, what I've learned is it's an incredibly important thing to get. And it's become more and more important in this country. And what you need to get it, and this is only part of the answer, is you need to engage at the local level. And whether I'm talking about pipelines or renewable energy, it's that same dialogue, is you need to have effective engagement. You need to have it early on in the process. And it has to be genuine. Guy and I talked earlier about, Guy asked me the question, he said, what's genuine engagement mean? And to me, when I thought about that, genuine engagement means actually engaging up front, and it means listening, and then it means responding. And I'll tell you, I learned this from Gord. The phrase he used earlier about we have to listen and respond rather than declare and defend. Gord used that phrase. I heard that from him 15 years ago. And you have to listen, and then you have to address. You have to understand, though, that you're not going to meet everybody's needs. You're not necessarily going to meet everyone's needs, but you have to listen. You have to tell people how you plan to respond to their concerns. And then there has to be a decision-making framework that has integrity, that a decision is made that people understand the decision. I think the phrase was used earlier, and I thought it was really good, and quoting Your Honor earlier about how the decision is made is now become as important as the decision itself. And I believe that. I really do. Watching the trade-offs that need to be made and all of these competing interests, whether it be local municipalities, Aboriginal interests, other stakeholders outside the community, they want to know that decisions are being made with integrity and with equity and with transparency. And our processes aren't catching up with that all the time, because the need for that's becoming even greater in Canadian society right now. And so as a developer, we're trying to catch up as well. As a company, companies aren't always doing the best job in this space either. Because as I said, 10 years ago, the expectations were a little bit different. And so now it's become even more important as a company to enter into that earlier on the process in a much different way than you would have before. As a company, what do you want? We're investing a lot of money in these projects, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you want certainty. You know, you'll hear from companies, well, I need certainty because I am investing a lot of money, and so I need certainty around that investment. But what you need is a framework that allows you to, that provides the certainty for you to make that investment. And if the answer is not to proceed with the development, that signal is understood early enough in the process so that investment isn't wasted and goes to the right place. And now I'll maybe come to maybe just a comment specifically on renewable energy development. And again, I'm not an expert. And the people who've spoken, I would say they know more than I do about the specific policies or regulatory frameworks around renewable energy development in the province of Ontario. But one of the things I noticed when we were developing our projects, and by the way, we developed projects and we had municipal opposition to those projects. And Suncor as a company, it's important to us that we engage with communities. And so we worked very hard to engage with the local municipalities. But it became a little bit intractable. And I think the reason it became intractable, shouldn't use that word, I guess, while you're speaking, a little tough to say, is that the process was set up to actually not support it. Because the process was set up so that developers were developing projects and making investment and actually being held to milestones and deadlines. And if they missed those milestones or deadlines, there was real consequences to that. And at the same time, though, we're engaging with the community. And there was an appeals process, the REA, which then had an appeals process, or sorry, the REA was the approval process, which then had an appeals process, which was the ERT, Environmental Review Tribunal. By the time that you went through that process, the amount of investment that had already been made by the companies was huge because of the conflict that was happening with the deadlines. And so I reflected on that because I think, and you would know, and I'm sure the mayor probably knows, how many ERT or how many appeals have been successful in the province? One. And I reflected on that. I asked when we were going through the process, because I can tell you from my perspective, I looked at the team that was developing the project and was doing a lot of work in the community to talk to the community, and engage in the community. But I said to them, how does this work? Because if the appeal is granted and the certificate or approval is pulled and this project isn't proceeding, the level of investment's been so high at this point. I said, but at the same time, you're telling me no one's ever won an appeal. I guess it's been one, or it was one at the time. And so I could immediately see how local communities would look at that process and think, the deck's stacked against me. And going into that process and feeling that way. Meanwhile, as a developer, you're going that process and thinking, my goodness, my investment's at risk through this process right now. And the reason I tell this story, and I might not have the details entirely right, but the point I want to make, though, is matching up the framework, matching up a process so that there's certainty for developers or companies who are coming in to invest. There's engagement with municipalities up front, and it's very clear where decision-making lies. It's very clear where the points of decision are, because I think one of the things I reflect on and concerns me a little bit, and this is broader now than just the conversation about renewable energy, is that I think what's happening in this country is we're almost getting to a place of paralysis around development. And the reason that I think we're getting to a place of paralysis around development is because we don't have sufficient processes and frameworks that provide the necessary input and engagement that can then lead to decisions that are understood, accepted, and transparent. And there will be there will be trade-offs. You never make 100%. How's that old Lincoln quote go? You don't make. You can satisfy 100% of the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you can't satisfy all the people all the time. And that's the case in energy development. There's trade-offs, but it's an important dialogue, incredibly important for our country right now, because we are moving to an energy transition. It's not an overnight transition. This is for the long haul, and we play in all forms of energy in this country. We have the largest, third largest oil resource on the planet. We have abundant hydroelectricity. We have technology and innovation in this country to drive renewable energy development. We're blessed with natural gas resources, and it's incumbent on us to really understand these processes of how do we get to efficient and effective development that comes to the right answers for Canadians, whether that be local communities or Ontarians or Canadians generally. So I want to thank Guy again, and apologize if that was maybe a little too general or fast, because I know it's a very complex conversation. But I also appreciate all the comments. I learned a lot, actually, over the last hour listening to the other speakers, and this is why I enjoy coming to these conversations, because it actually is a dialogue. We do need to actually have the discussion about energy. It's vitally important to the country, and this conversation about renewable energy development in this province is an important conversation to be having, because if I understood the graph and I understand everything that I've seen, there's more to come. And we have to be really smart about it as a province. So thank you very much. Looking forward to that.